What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of HR Heretics. Today, we're going to do a segment on back channels. So, Kelly, we've talked about back channels a couple of times during episodes, but we've never given them its own time, and I want to do that today. So let's start with, what is a back channel?
Yeah, I'm glad we're doing this. The back channel, it's kind of like this behind the scenes, I call it like the underground like mafia of getting feedback on people. You know, I kind of call it, we have the above the table process, references, the whole thing that everyone knows about. And then there's the real deal where I call it the under the table process, where people basically call their friends or people they know well and say, hey, give me the real deal on Nolan, you know? And so I call it like the real talk, which is helpful. And it's also has some big flaws with it. And so I'm glad we're talking about it today.
I agree. The way I frame a back channel is a reference on a candidate that the candidate didn't give us. So the reason why people do back channels is because it turns out that the interview process is imperfect. We've talked about this a million times on the show. We are trying to get signal on candidates. Candidates, as part of the reference process, will obviously give you people that will speak very highly of them. And oftentimes in the reference process, it's almost impossible to get constructive feedback on a candidate. And so given that we are left with few other options, what we tend to do is we pick up the phone and, we call people from other companies that we know to get feedback on that person. The thing I want to talk about is the how. I actually think most companies do back channeling wrong, and there is a right way to do it. So one of the things that I tell candidates as they're in an interview process is that we will do back channels. I will explain what that is. I will explain why we do it. And then I will give the candidate the opportunity to tell me if there are any red flags, whether that be, they're worried about talking to a current manager, or the current employer doesn't know that they're interviewing, or somebody's going to talk really negatively about them. That always comes up. And I find that if you just take that one easy step and tell the candidate what you're going to do, it doesn't surprise the candidate. They are able to actually help you figure out how to navigate this complex process. And it puts everything above board. As you said, to lead off the show, it's kind of like this underground thing. I think that's actually one of the ways that you can make it above ground.
Yeah. And I think it's increasingly become above ground. I think, especially if you're a senior leader, if you don't know this is a thing, I think that is a red flag in itself. I mean, this is just kind of normal way of business now. And to your point, I think the maturity around it is the biggest problem. You know what I mean? Because the person that's asking for the back channel, as well as the person that's giving the back channel, we have to go beyond, hey, are they good or not? Should I hire them or not? It's like, look, this person was, I worked with them 10 years ago. They've changed. Everyone has challenges or development areas. I just think the maturity upon which we enter these conversations is the fulcrum for me of whether they can be actually really helpful and advantageous even after you hire someone based on what you ask and the information you get, or actually really dangerous and fraught with bias and fraught with just things that happened a long time ago or whatnot, and does not account for how that person has grown over the years.
You hit on two really important things there, which is like, how do you actually do them? And how do we think about signal that is not positive? And then the second piece is like, when do you do them? So I want to start with when, because I think this is where things get really delicate. So I once worked with the CEO who literally, once a candidate was introduced from an executive recruiter, would immediately start back channeling the candidate. No, and this is going back to like how we do it, but there was no awareness given to the candidate. The CEO is just trying to get signal to figure out like, okay, what should I know about this person? Where should I focus? It was in good conscience to try and figure things out. But one of those back channels got back to the candidate before the CEO had the initial call. And the candidate was like, what the fuck is this? Like, why would I want to talk to you now? Like, what a weird
Yeah.
thing for you to do. So let's talk about when you think back channeling is appropriate. What's your take on that, Kelli?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it depends. I always think it depends. Early on in the process, look, I call it the back channeling frenzy. We want to avoid what you just said, which is this feeding frenzy of like, let's start back channeling everyone we have top of funnel right when they enter the process. Like, absolutely not. Right. Like, and so I always call it like quality over the quantity of this stuff is really important, because I've seen like 20 candidates top of funnel and this executive recruiter is back channeling all of them. And there's all this noise in the market and it just gets very confusing very quickly. And it's hard to actually determine, what's quality and what's noise in the system. So I do actually like to say like late stage in the process. If you have 3 or 4 final candidates, hopefully it's, 1 to 3. I think that's the right time to be like, listen, we are really serious about these people. We want to know the good, the bad, all of it, because we're probably going to hire them. They are viable candidates, and we're going to actually, assess them through the process and not let potentially biased, frenzy back channels influence whether or not we move them forward in our process. So I think it can be very dangerous to do that up front, because you might, rule someone out when they should actually go through the process and they might be a great candidate for your company. What do you think?
So well said. I strongly agree. I think doing it at the beginning of the process will color your judgment on somebody before you are ready to have nuance in the judgment. So I actually like to think of it a little bit like dating. People hate this analogy, but it's like, look, like, why don't you just like get to know somebody, like go to coffee a few times, grab a movie, like before you start talking to their friends and start like, meeting family members right away. It's just like, we don't need to get to that level of depth. Like, there is a process to do things. So I think that's the right way to do it. The thing I would say is like, somewhere in the middle of the process, after you have met the candidate, you're building a relationship, to tell them that this is part of your process, I think is the right step. And that's what I think people don't do. And that's what I think is like, if you could just present it there, and then once you start having conversations, then you could actually have increasingly more back channels to then go and vet what you hear in those conversations. I think that's the right time.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Your workforce is both your organization's greatest strength and largest single cost. With Planful, it's easy to unlock the secrets of successful workforce planning so you and your HR team can make the right business decisions. Imagine using data-driven insights to develop accurate forecasts, close hiring gaps, and adjust talent acquisition plans collaboratively based on costs today and into the future. Planful lets you collaborate with colleagues in finance to understand the value your employees bring to the table. And the best part, you can get started with Planful in just weeks with minimal help from IT. Plus, with Planful, you get an endless runway. Planful grows with you, no matter how fast or large your team scales. Ready to transform your HR strategy? Join over 1,500 organizations worldwide who trust Planful as their go-to workforce planning software at planful.com/heretics.
Here's a crazy stat. Between hybrid and frontline employees, about 80% don't typically work in an office. So it's no surprise that digitally engaging employees is the number one concern for CEOs as companies go hybrid. But as hybrid is quickly becoming the norm, it's easy for workplaces to start feeling a little less human. Yet delighting a digital workforce is possible, and it can even be, dare we say, fun. That's where Workvivo, Zoom's employee experience platform, comes in. If you've ever recoiled at the thought of a static intranet that looks like something you built in 1995 using MS Paint, have no fear. Workvivo is a dynamic, intuitive, accessible, and mobile-first tool. People actually like using it, which is why companies like Ryanair, Dollar General, Virgin, and more have rolled it out to hundreds of thousands of employees. Workvivo's activity feeds, spaces, shoutouts, and live streams, among other features, help elevate the employee experience like never before. The result? Dramatically better retention, productivity, and most importantly, connectedness. a greater sense of the belonging we all crave at work, whether we sit at a desk or drive a truck. Make Workvivo the digital heart of your organization and achieve limitless human connection. Head to workvivo.com to book a demo and make sure you tell them that Nolan and Kelli from HR Heretics sent you.
Yeah. I think you, when you mentioned color your judgment, I think that was a perfect way to sum that up. And we talk about bias in the hiring process, in all different facets. This one, if you're not careful, is just like totally fraught with bias, in my opinion. And a lot of it is how you tee something up too, right? Like the back channels I get are usually, let's be honest, texts or calls. Hey, what do you think of Sally? Should I hire her? That's the wrong question. Like, talk to someone, tell them first what you think. Think for yourself. Hey, we've been talking to Sally for 3 months. She's at the end of her process. Here's what we saw and feel and think would be great for our company. Here are some areas where she might need some help based on what we've seen. Like, what is your assessment? You worked with her 6 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. I know she might be a different human now. Tell me, reconcile that for me. Not to say, should I hire her or not? But if we did in this situation, here's our culture, here's the job, here's what it's going to take, here's our assessment. What do you think? And then most importantly, treat it as a data point. It is not a decision. Like if I call you, Nolan, and I want to hire someone who you worked with 6 years ago, and I'm like, oh, Nolan said not to hire them, I'm not going to hire them. That's insane. And I think that happens more than we think. And so again, I'm going to go back to that maturity of how you ask the question, how you tee it up to the person you're asking the back channel about, as well as the people you're asking about the candidate, right? It's both those people.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Real talk, most talent leaders haven't yet cracked how to leverage AI for meaningful impact on their hiring processes and business goals. But the leaders who are effectively using AI to transform their recruiting team's efficiency and quality use Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. That means your people can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Join forward-thinking talent leaders at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts, or get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
I think that's actually the most prevalent way it happens. So just for the audience, if you're not used to this process, the way it usually happens is, for me, I will get a text or an email that says, hey, what do you think about insert candidate name? We're interviewing them for a role. And usually, everyone's busy, and I've been guilty of this, especially in the past. I'm much better at it today because I know I'm on the other side of this too, and people are doing this to me. Almost always now I will pick up the phone. Yes. 6 or 7 years ago, when I was more immature, I would just send a note and be like, yep, good. And then if it was negative, I would say, let's jump on a call. And
Totally.
That's typically what happens. Yeah. I actually want to
talk
talk
about
a
lot of people will take that, Nolan. A lot of people will say, people will call me and say, oh my God, someone just texted me about this person. What should I do? They don't want to engage in that. And a lot of people, if they get a text back saying, let's talk, they'll just rule the candidate out. And again, you're missing every part of the context of the damn company, the job, the culture, what they're trying to do. And you're just going back to how you worked with that person 6 years ago. And it's just not right. Again, to the bias point.
So you gave a hypothetical. I will give a very real back channel.
No, that wasn't hypothetical.
Just happened. Okay. Cool. I had one that just happened 4 weeks ago. So
great.
A friend reached out saying, hey, I know you worked with this person who was an exec at a company that I was with. And he's like, what was your take? And so we jumped on a call and I was like, look, this is a nuanced situation. They were in a tough role at a tough time, working on like a 0 to 1 product. It ultimately didn't work. Here's my nuance on it. Number one, I love this person as a person. I think they're a phenomenal leader. Like I saw followership, always really positive interactions, but ultimately for many different reasons, again, one person's opinion, it didn't work out with the product. And so I gave that feedback. 6 weeks later, 4 or 5, 6 weeks, I'm on that zone. I get a text from the person who reached out saying, hey, thanks so much for the feedback. We spent more time, we did more digging, and we actually decided to make an offer, which I loved. I'll tell one more story. So I did a back channel when I was at DoorDash on a recruiting leader that I wanted to hire. And I reached out to somebody who gave literally the best analogy I've ever heard about this. And I was asking like why the candidate didn't progress faster in their career at the current company. And the leader said, look, Nolan, have you ever been to a family reunion to where, you go and see your uncle and your uncle's like, oh, look, it's little Nolan.
Yeah.
And you're like, dude, I'm a grown ass man. Like, quit calling me little Nolan. Well, it turns out like that's a bias in humans. We have that first impression in mind. And so oftentimes when you're doing a back channel, you're talking to someone that can only think about that person in that context of when they first met them. And they don't apply human growth.
Yes.
And so when I heard that, it actually completely changed the way that I thought about all sorts of feedback and all sorts of interactions, because everybody grows, everybody changes.
Yeah.
And I find that the biggest recruiting bias is that we don't apply that. We don't give people that opportunity to grow and to learn. And I think that's where back channels really go wrong.
It's the opposite of recency bias. You know what I mean? It's like human nature. Like my brother is 43 years old and he's still 5 to me. I mean, it's just how it works, and you have to fight that. And so I think those stories make sense. And 10 years ago, I used to text back. I used to do the wrong things at times. And I think that's my biggest ask is, to the earthquake analogy, like stop, drop, and roll, like get on a conversation, apply context, talk about the nuances, ask questions. What are you asking this person to do? What's your company like? What's the plan the next 2 years? Like there's always the landscape of which this person sits in, coupled with their growth and how they've changed. And there's no way you can cover that in a text. It's not fair to the candidate. It's not fair to the company potentially hiring them.
And it's not a thorough process. And that's ultimately like what we're trying to do. I want to talk about when you get negative back channel. So I just told that story. There's a lot of examples, and Kelli, let's just talk about us, right? Like in our careers, it's super clear now that if you go deep enough, you are going to find people that do not like us. And that is just going to happen as you get more senior in your career. You're going to have people who don't have 100% positive things to say about you. And that's like humans, right? That's what happens. Like we're not perfect. That is where the meat is. Like that is the best opportunity to actually go deep and figure out what is actually going on here. So when I get a negative back channel, what I like to do is go as deep as possible about what happened, why it happened, what that person's version of events were. Then if I can keep their anonymity, and I actually usually ask them in the conversation, hey, can I bring this up to this person and ask them specifically what happened in the situation? Then you take that information and you go to the candidate. And you ask the candidate, hey, I heard this as part of our process. Can you give me your thoughts and reflections on this? And the best people have self-reflection. They will admit when things didn't go well. They will admit that maybe they didn't handle things great.
Totally.
And for me, that's what I'm looking for in a process. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for growth.
Yeah. I mean, the irony is the reason that person might not be getting great feedback might be a great reason to hire them. Like that's the irony of the context around this is those things might actually be positive stories. If I hear great things about someone and there's no turbulence, that's a red flag to me. And we had a candidate at a recent company. I was hiring for a C-suite candidate, and that happened. And we asked the person, I said, listen, here's some themes. What's the deal? And that's actually a great litmus test of the kind of person you want to hire to see how they react in that situation. So again, it's back to the maturity though. A lot of people will just shotgun, boom, I heard this. What is this? And they go back channel and everyone's spinning around and the frenzy starts, and that's just not productive. So again, it's all about the maturity of the how you engage in this. And there's a lot of folks, that are running around with scissors with this stuff, or they shouldn't be.
You know who I think is the most immature on this? I might take some shit for this comment. Is the board of directors. I find that most boards that I've interacted with are incredibly shallow on talent topics. And they'll reach out to one of their friends who has like one negative thing to say. And it's like, well, I got a negative back channel from so-and-so. And
Totally.
then, when you start to do actually like the nuanced thing, the board the board member typically won't engage in that topic. Have you had that experience, Kelli?
Of course. And I will go on to say that's the cycle that's killing us. And nothing against boards. I love all the board members I've worked with, love the venture capital people. I work with them still. But let's be honest, it's changing now. But for the last 20, 30 years, those people, they're all very similar, right? Back to bias, it's very homogeneous as far as those folks, and they think alike, and they might give thumbs up or thumbs down, the same criteria, and it's kind of like that. It's fraught with bias, and maturity, context, the situation, it all matters.
The worst part for me is the depth.
So.
Like it's one thing to have, to say something negative about somebody, like you're allowed to have that opinion. Yeah. But you're not allowed to have that opinion and not be able to go to the lowest level of detail of why you feel that way.
I think
I've experienced a lot of that, unfortunately, in my
career.
It feels like the higher you go, the more of that unfortunately exists.
Yeah, and let's just name the shallowness. It's in my experience, it's usually, is this person liked or not? It's back to I always joke about middle school, tech in middle school. There's a lot of similarities, and my kids are in 8th grade, so I see it, but that's usually what it boils down to. Do I kind of like this person? Are they in? Should you work with them? And again, I think it's just so much more complex than that.
Yep. I'm with you. Well, look, everybody, please keep sending us these topics. This is actually one that came from the audience recently. So send us your topics, send us your thoughts. And as always, thanks so much for your listenership.
Yeah. Thanks all.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.